Hello everyone, my name is Christian. Welcome back to Tekpon. Today our guest is Matt, the founder at Nituno. Hello.
Hey, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Very good. I wanted to invite you to our podcast after your panel at B2B Rocks regarding the expanding to the US. I really enjoyed it, so I'm happy
Thanks so
to
much.
have you. At first, please tell us what your company does.
So my name is Matt Rauscher. I currently work for a company called Nituno, and it's a consultancy specialized in helping European SaaS companies who are opening the US. We mostly focus on allowing companies to better define the ICP, better collect as many signals as possible to know when companies are ready to buy. And that way, what we try to achieve is helping companies start closing US accounts before they go to the US and before they start burning the cash and spending the money. The more success signals you can get ahead of going to the US, the better you can hire, the more money you can raise. It creates a positive cycle. So we try to, once again, work with our customers to front load the risk as much as possible before going to the US to prepare for the actual launch.
I understand. What problems do you see or what mistakes do you see SaaS companies do when they launch to the US?
So there's a lot of mistakes. I would say the first mistake is trying to replicate product market fit between the US and Europe. I think in Europe, we are very much more, the tech buyers are often work for IT. They're very much technical, but also interested, curious about the technicality. Biggest mistake I see is trying to replicate that in the US. In the US, the buyer is a business user, and the buyer puts convenience above everything else. So to put it simply, you could be 3 times more expensive in America, but you cannot accept, a customer will never accept if they have to do work ahead of time. So we have to create software that are maybe more expensive, but easier to use, more fluid to use with onboarding that is really perfect. And not reworking that onboarding step and that ICP step ahead of time is a big mistake I see all the time.
Really interesting. And the big question is that was at the panel as well. Why should companies expand to the US or why should they start there first?
So I think that's the $1 million question, right? You have, and I have a very specific, not insight, but at least almost like a political view. Like we can debate this. I'm ready to debate it.
Okay.
But fundamentally, I think there is not a single big B2B SaaS companies that has changed the world and come out of Europe. And I think there's a reason for that. We have to accept it, right? Europe is not a market where you can create a giant company that will change the world. Point, period, And I know every time I do a panel, somebody finds an exception. But the reality is what you need to succeed in B2B is you need to have a very strong technology, which means a lot of R&D. You need to sell that software as quickly as possible, as expensive as possible. And you need a go-to-market that means that every time you get 1, 2, 3 successes, you need to scale those success from 3 to 100.
Yeah.
And for all those metrics, America is a better place to go. The market is fundamentally bigger, which means if you have a lot of R&D, you have a lot of customers you can disperse it on, right? It's much bigger than Switzerland, Germany, France, or whatever. The second thing is the customers are willing to pay a lot more. There's a understanding of risk that is very different. Whenever you talk to a European customer, you say, my software costs $100,000 per year. They're going to calculate what happens if I lose $100,000.
Yes.
The American is going to calculate that, but also going to calculate what happens if I miss out on this technological change. Yes. And that notion of counting the economic cost, which is the cost of missing out, does not exist in the European mind. The European thinks that the world is great as it is, and every change is a frustration. Yeah. Finally, so because of that, they're willing to pay more, but they're also willing to decide faster. I think there's also an approach of Americans are very transactional. Like, if this makes sense, let's give it a try. Who cares, right? And this is true for customers. This is also true if you raise capital. The capital markets are deeper. Yes, maybe not that deeper. I mean, to put it simply, there's a lot of money in Europe, but just the credit card goes faster. People just pay faster. So you get bigger contracts at quicker, and you're able to replicate them a lot faster because there's one language, one money. And for all these reasons, to put it simply, if you take Europe as in UEFA, I don't know if you follow football, but Israel pays the euro, right? The biggest tech country in Europe is Israel. And the business model is very simple. Zero customers in Israel, 100% of our customers in the US. And from the US, we are then going to be able to expand
Yeah.
globally. But
Yeah, I totally agree, and you said it really well. I appreciate it. When you listen to our to your speech at B2B Rocks, our CEO looked at me and said, "Christian, we have to send you to the US to learn the market there." So my next question would be, why should the founders spend time in the US, or is it essential?
yeah, so it's essential for two reasons. The first reason is what's good. The ICP that you have in Europe is not the ICP that you have in the US. The competitive environment that you have in the US will not be the competitive environment that you have in Europe. So for both of these reasons, there comes a time when you need to understand the American culture if you want to succeed in America. And I think that that's really critical. The same way I can't open, Finland if I've never been to Finland, or if I go to Finland once a quarter, it doesn't. I'm French; it will not happen, right? So the closer you get to the market, the more successful you are. Also, I believe that when I talk to founders about this moving, I often hear founders tell me, yes, but if I leave, Paris, for example, if I'm in Paris, if I leave Paris to go to San Francisco, I'm going to lose opportunities that I would have in Paris. Investors, potential hires, potential customers, etc. There's another aspect, to go back to your previous question, there's another aspect of where America is more powerful than Europe in tech, which is the media is extremely powerful. There is a notion of the same way that if you're a good singer and you're born in Los Angeles, the probability of being a global star is a million times bigger than if you're from Europe. It's the same for technology. So Slack had never opened a single office in Europe, and everybody in Europe was already using Slack, because the whole world looks at Silicon Valley and says, what are the best practices from Silicon Valley, and can I bring that back home?
Yes.
If a founder moves to San Francisco and you understand the market and you break through in the market, I've seen this with my previous company that was French, that was called EasyUp. The biggest customers in France called us once they found out we were going big in America. We had great employees, asked to join us because they had heard of us in America. And there's a notion, just like you have to be in Hollywood if you want to be in acting, you have to be in Silicon Valley or in New York if you're in tech. And every success you have in the US will actually make successes at home much, much easier. So the founder is not kidding home by going to America. By going to America, you're allowing yourself to go global and to succeed everywhere.
Makes total sense. But do you think is it enough to send just one co-founder, one team member, or can you just travel there for a few weeks, or do you have to actually stay in there?
You have to stay. You have to have as many founders as possible to stay. I know one of the models I see often that works is having the technical founder has to come at least once a quarter, but the sales founder has to be full-time. I've also seen a model when one of the two co-founders goes, and there's a mistake I see often, which is German company has the sales co-founder go to America and the technical co-founder stay in Munich, for example.
Okay.
The mistake is because they have to meet in person regularly and to keep everything flowing, it's the American that comes to Europe and not the other way around. Yeah. And that creates a chasm, and you see it in the product, because the product team does 80% of what the US team needs to succeed. And so you have to put it simply, make your intellectual headquarters be as close as possible to your ecosystem. If it's technology, it's San Francisco. If you're selling to finance, it's New York City. You have different markets and different realities. But America has to be the intellectual center. Your sales has to be there full time, and your tech can stay in Europe if you want to keep, your good European. We have great engineers. The costs are much lower. We're also able to create much better teams because there is a cultural aspect to hiring. If you want to hire superstar engineers in America and you know no one, it's very difficult. But whatever happens, once again, the more you lean into America, the higher probability of success.
I understand, but here's an interesting question. We see founders nowadays that don't want to be number one in the market. They prefer to be top 5, top 10, and they're happy with being profitable, hiring people. Do you think is that necessity if you want to be, let's say, middle class startup or profitable company, or is it just for the highly profitable, highly successful companies?
So I think there's a few questions you can ask. The first thing is, a startup by definition means you create a product that you sell to as many people as possible. If you
Yes,
want a middle class company, you could be a technology company. You're not a startup.
correct.
And I've seen in Europe, particularly, I've seen consultancies get startup of the year awards. Like, no, if you're not aiming for hyper growth, you're not a startup. Please get out of this train. Don't It's okay to have a middle class, but don't try to get the medals if you're not willing to go to war.
You're right.
The second thing that is to add to that, I would say that how can I phrase it? You have a problem with categories, which is in technology in general, the leader of a category gets 76% of the value of a market. You can see, you can Google it. It's a category. Pirates talks about this a lot. It was a Harvard study, but Salesforce, if you're looking at CRM, Salesforce has 76% of the market. So if you're number two, you're fighting for 24% remaining. If you're in the top five, you're fighting for, you're actually number four in a market that is 4 times smaller than the market because the leader has already taken everything away. And so there is no future for any company in technology, in my view, that is not leader of a market. Now, the market can be a niche, right? And there's different type of niche. You can create for a CRM for bankers, for example, like a very specific persona. In Europe, we have a lot of successful regional companies, and often they exist because, for example, if you do a payroll software for Germany, you have to know German employment law, and that is something that no global company will ever try to go after you on, right? So you have to be number one. Your market can be smaller. And if you're number one of a smaller market, there's an opportunity for exit. There's, a big American company can buy you out. For example, you have a payroll software. There's a company that does, ADP does payroll in America. They decide that they want to go to Switzerland. They buy the ADP of Switzerland. But nobody will ever buy company number 5.
Yeah.
And technology is about creating standards that scale. Like we have a lot of R&D, right? So it costs the same to do Excel for one person than to do Excel for a billion people, right? So either you're trying, in my view, to create a software company that is going to be hyper scale. I have once my R&D and then I can set it to a billion people. Or number one, for a specific market, these are often markets where you have the protection of the law, right? Finance, neobank. Like if you start neobank in France, you have to ask the French authorities to give you a regulator to give you a certification.
Yes.
No Chinese company is going to go ask the French regulator for an authorization, right? But so these companies can exist, and their exit opportunity is a global company trying to buy their way into a market. And then the third way, if you want to do a middle class company or, profitable, not too high growth, kind of comfortable, then you create a service company because your technology will expire in 5 years anyways. And you want to have enough consultants to be able to stay cash flow positive when your technology is worthless.
I love your perspective. I'm curious to know what types of companies are you helping? Is it only for SaaS?
So I do B2B SaaS, and I have a tendency of higher ACVs. To put it simply, $1,000 per month is probably the minimum. And I do help. My experience has been mostly with enterprise accounts. That's 60, 120,000 per year. Once again, that's that niche, high level, high value relationships that you have to build more than transactional is really what I focus on, because as a salesman, as a marketer, I think also it's harder to convince somebody to put more money on the table, and therefore the challenge is more interesting.
What is the future that you see with in SaaS now with the AI sales? Automating all the emails, calls.
Yeah, so I have I think it's I have a vision that I'm currently working on, but I think 10 years from now there will not be an SDR. I think there's a sense to explain the history of the SDR. You have the salesperson called the account executive, and one day he used to cry all the time that marketing was not giving him enough leads. And then we told him, okay, you have to make phone calls and go get customers too. You can't expect marketing to do all the work. So he hired an assistant that he called the SDR. And the deal with the SDR is very funny. The deal was you told young people with a lot of energy that if they start SDR, they will be promoted to account executives. And 10, 15 years later, the reality is, maybe 10% of SDRs became account executives. But SDR is both the worst job in the world. It's the job that we almost created the SDR job by accident, right? You have 600,000 SDRs in America today. Like, wow. It's a gigantic market for a role that, once again, was supposed to be temporary. It was like, training to become an account executive, and that didn't work out. So I really feel that, AI will completely automate SDR. SDRs, what do? They build lists, they qualify accounts, they book meetings. Done. So that we know we won't need. And then there's always a notion of opposites, right? We're going to hyper personalize and scale a lot of things that weren't personalized before. Every email sequencing tool in the world is going to die if they don't go quickly. But I think at the same time, we're going to have a return to high value trade show, networking communities. The Slack groups are going to go from Slack group to you go to the bar to meet real people. I really believe in these opposites where we're going to scale a lot of digital relationships, and then we're going to have few relationships in person, but they're going to be much deeper, much better, much smarter. So that's what I see. I think it's a long movement that we've seen with technology, but it's going to continue.
Thank you for explaining. What would be your best piece of advice for a starting salesperson?
For a starting salesperson, the advice I give myself every day is to always walk in the customer's shoe. I receive a lot of sales emails. I'm sure you do too. I think one of the things that surprises me the most, but I do it too, right? It's really how can I say it? It's a bad reflex we all have.
Yeah.
We always talk about ourselves, right? You send an email. The first thing it says is, "Hi, we're this software. We're different because we do this because. Would you like to meet?" No, I wouldn't like to meet. I have nothing to tell you, right? We have to always work where every time I write a sentence, the subject is my customer. The subject is never my product. And trying to exercise yourself of always rereading what you write before you're sending and asking yourself, how will my customer react when he sees this? I think is really critical. Talk less about the product, less about you, less about your company, more about the customer. And the way I do this is, once again, customer is the subject.
Yep.
There's a verb, and then the rest of the sentence can talk about my product, sure, but the customer first.
That's a good formula. Thank you. Now more on the personal side, I'd love to hear your backstory. So how you started your career and then your story until now, founding the company. So
you want my background and my biography?
Please.
So very simply, my name is Matt Rauscher. I got into tech a little bit by accident. I joined a business school. I needed to pay for my studies. And the way I did it is I found a niche in translating tech documentation for SaaS companies going to the US. I was in France. A lot of French companies, had so-so English or a lot of French content. I would translate that. I would prepare the wikis, the tutorials, everything you need to start your SaaS business before they start going after SaaS companies. One of the companies I worked with was called EasyUp, and EasyUp was an interesting company. It was extremely technical. It was a natural language generation engine. Mm-hmm. Natural language generation is the grandfather of the LLM, to put it simply. You used to give it data, it would spit out text. Now with LLM, you talk text and it answers back, right, which is the next level. But what was interesting with that company is I started translating over 6 months their documentation, very technical for developers, like thousands of pages of PDFs that we had to put in English and wikis. And they got a phone call from a French person working for a giant American company. And because I was the only person in the company who knew the technical documentation in English, they said, we have to take you, so come with us. And so I helped them open the US. I started, way low as a consultant, pre-sales engineer. Over the years, I got up to, I finished managing the US and Asia Pacific region. So it was quite big. The company was purchased a few years ago by private equity. And since then, what I've done for the past 3 years and a half is Nituno. And Nituno was a consulting company. We've always done go-to-market. We actually had a part of our go-to-market that had to do with content marketing. I realized that a lot of my customers were actually struggling with content marketing, so we built content marketing. We moved off that because we saw ChatGPT coming, and we realized that we could still sign contracts, but they're probably going to be smaller. They're probably going to be harder to sell, and so might as well move away.
Yes.
But always on helping European firms go to America, because that's my culture. I lived 20 years in the United States.
Wow.
And I actually lived there as a child, came back to Europe for high school and college, and then went back. But that bicultural has really helped me. And I used my consulting as a way of not doing a single industry. I did NLG. NLG was very close to the business intelligence tool. Our customers were people like Oracle, Tableau, Salesforce. Anybody who had a dashboard was our potential customer. And my thought coming out of Easy Up was to say, if I do another business intelligence company, I'll do 25 years of business intelligence. So I use consulting as a way of doing healthcare, cybersecurity, SaaS, emailing software, really a lot of different missions, a lot of different industries. And that was, after 7 years of one company, I've done probably 5 companies a year for the past 3 years, which has been quite refreshing.
That's a great story. Thank you so much for sharing. You have a lot of expertise. How about an advice for starting founders, let's say from Europe, to be more specific?
Okay, I think we talked about this. One advice I would give is think about the category. And thinking about the category is thinking about the customer, thinking about the problem, thinking about the competitive environment. But this notion that 76% of the market value is owned by one company means that you need to, instead of building something in a category, you need, in my view, to build a category and be the leader of it. And a category, I define it as in opposition to the previous category. Right? The same way Picasso came out and looked at the Romantics and said, "You're all losers." He didn't say we're all different. He said they're losers. Cubism is the future, right? And that's how he took off. But thinking a little more, once again, my recommendation would be to be more strategic. I see a lot of startups who maybe sometimes they even find a beginning of product market fit. By sheer luck, sometimes often with a lot of work and by interviewing a lot of customers. But as soon as you're trying to scale from I have a few customers and there's 3 of us to we want to become a company, be strategic, because if you're not, you may go from 3 to 30, but you will plateau at 30 employees. You will be completely exhausted and you will have burned all your cash. Whereas if you are strategic, then it gets easier along the way, or at least the problems get harder, but you go a lot faster. You accelerate every time. That's the exponential curve that we're all looking for. So yeah, be strategic, which is quite vague, but at the same time quite essential, and something I don't see enough.
I understand. Thank you so much. I have one last question that I usually ask all our guests. What's your favorite SaaS product that you use?
My favorite SaaS product. That's good. That's a good question. I have quite a lot. There's a product I love right now, which is Photo Room.
Okay.
Because the simplicity, I feel like it reminds me when the first time, so Photo Room, you take a picture of a product and it's AI that is going to automatically allow you to remove the background and do a lot of things. Where I think they really nailed it is they were able to put a lot of technology, a lot of value with a lot of simplicity. And I think it reminds me of Instagram almost, where Instagram, was take pictures, share, do filter. But with those 3 functions, you could it opened a whole horizon of things that you couldn't imagine before and you weren't able to do. And that notion of putting a lot of power in very simple features, I think there's an elegance to it, and it shows a lot of talent.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Is there anything else that you want to share today on the podcast? You already shared a lot of value, but I want to give you one last...
Look, I think at the end of the day, one of the things I would say is if you're a starting founder, I'll give you one advice that I actually heard. I hadn't phrased it like this, but I listened to a podcast just the other day and it stuck with me. A lot of entrepreneurs I see are surrounded with mentors. And mentors are often, they're VCs, older people who have done it before, etc. What I don't see enough, and I think is actually more useful, it's my added value when I meet with founders who take me, but look for a sparring partner. And a sparring partner is somebody who's also working, who also has challenges, but somebody who's going to challenge you when you have an idea. He doesn't say yes. He's not vague. He says, no, you're wrong. Here's why. And that debate, I really believe that we flee conflict when, in fact, as long as the conflict isn't about people, it's about the work. I feel like there's a lot of value that is created when we forge, when we go back and forth, when we iterate. And entrepreneurs, particularly in the past, 5 years when money was easy and growth was easy, almost became not superstars. That's not the word, but everybody was saying, "Oh, you're starting a company. That's great." When there's nothing great about starting a company, right? It's just, what is great is what you do, and try to surround yourself once again with these people who push back, who question you, who challenge you. That will allow you to go a lot further than having yes men who think you're great when you raise money and think you're awful when you don't raise money and when your value goes down.
Thank you so much, Matt. You did fantastic. I'm super grateful. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you for everything, and have a good day. Thanks for having me.